Salutations, fellow readers. It took me over 30 hours over the course of multiple days to build another bookcase and then rearrange my home library until I was happy with it. Fortunately, you just get to sit there and enjoy a video that's under 15 minutes long. There are going to be chapters in the description if you want to skip around. Let's start by going back in time.
I started off with 3 bookcases and a shoe rack. I moved the shoe rack elsewhere and assembled a bookcase to put there. The dimensions of the new bookcase are narrower than the other 3 in order to fit the space.
My plan is to hang everything that's on the floor over there onto the blank wall, and then to take everything off the shelves to put on the floor, and then put them back on the shelves in places that I've predetermined where I want them. I actually wrote down which decor items and books I want on which shelves. So fingers crossed that everything fits. We won't know until we try, so let's take everything off. When I took them off the shelves, I put them directly into the piles specified on the spreadsheet. I was able to dust the shelves, and now it should theoretically be easy putting them back on the shelves.
I experimented with the shelf of Arthurian and mythology retellings together and decided to separate them.
I'll give you a detailed tour of my home library with the first layout I tried
To have a
fun time capsule of it, even though I did change about half of it.
These are the books I have read and intend to reread.
The cherry bookcase was a gift from my grandparents when I was a teenager. The 2 matching bookcases on the left I purchased
From the Mainstays brand.
in my 20s, and I added an additional shelf to them. The bookcase on the right I purchased myself used in my 30s. The center bookcases feature fantasy books. This is a repurposed shower caddy I use to display the only 3 memoirs I have, and a little astrology book that's short enough to fit on that shelf. The caddy is reinforced with cardboard so that the books don't fall through the slats. This bookcase begins with long and short form poetry on top. That Beetlejuice cup is from when I saw the musical. I use it to hold my bookmarks. The Gilded Red Book is Shakespeare. This shelf has realistic fiction that doesn't go in any other subgenres I have. Philippa Gregory is my favorite historical fiction author, and The Queen's Fool and Other Balloon Girl are the books I like best by her. U.S. residents may recognize some really great required reading we had in school. Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, Wonder, Number the Stars, and The Outsiders. 7 Seas is a company that puts out unabridged classics with colorful illustrations. I got Pride and Prejudice and The Secret Garden. I went through so many versions of The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho online before I settled on this one because I thought the cover was super epic. The next shelf is adult queer romance. On the left, we have realistic ones, whether they are contemporary or historical setting. And then on the right, we have fantasy romance. I went through a lot of trouble to get a matching set of The Last Binding by Freya Marsk. The first 2 are the Waterstones editions, which are really nice. They're signed with sprayed edges, but their website confirmed they weren't going to put out another book in the same height. And I was disappointed. So I did some research and found that Illumicrate was actually putting out a version that was going to be in the same size for book 3. And I was grateful I was able to buy that. And now I'm really satisfied looking at this series on the shelf. I really appreciate that they're numbered. I wish more series put numbers on the side of their books. A special shout out is deserved for Casey McQuiston's Red, White, and Royal Blue and KJ Charles, The Magpie Lord, because those are 2 books I own in 3 formats: audio, physical, and digital ebook, which should show you how much I adore them. This shelf is queer teen romance. On the left, again, we've got realistic fiction, and then stacked horizontally on the right, we have fantasy. In Other Lands by Sarah Reese Brennan and The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea by Maggie Takuta Hall definitely deserve more recognition. Next, we have science fiction with The Darkness Outside Us by Elliot Schreifer prominently displayed. I've got 3 dystopian series. You may notice this shelf didn't come with this bookcase. It's actually a little too short, so I taped cardboard on the ends. It is staying right now. Let's hope it stays that way and doesn't collapse to the shelf underneath, which has more science fiction, steampunk, and time travel. There's a lot of space on this shelf so that once I get through my unread science fiction, it has room to be transferred over here. The bottom shelf is fantasy and fable short fiction. Rumpelstiltskin is my favorite fairy tale. This bookcase starts with Arthurian retellings on top. The Merlin trilogy by Mary Stewart is my favorite. I have the most nostalgia for the children's short stories by Roger Lancelyn Green. I wish they would make the first book in the new Camelot trilogy by Robin Schneider with the same covers as the others. The next shelf has funny kids books with fairies and demons. It's mostly Artemis Fowl. After that is the Rick Riordan shelf. Percy Jackson and Magnus Chase are my favorite series by him. This shelf contains books that take place in a magical school setting. Children of the Red King, Magisterium, and Simon Snow. I had a hard time deciding if I wanted to face book 1 of Simon Snow or book 3 of Magisterium outwards because I love both those series and those covers. These Beanie Babies are from different loved ones of mine. Next, we've got my Himalayan salt lamp. On the bottom, there's Ranger's Apprentice and Warrior Cats.
Next bookcase.
There's an illustrated copy of The Hobbit and my ring from Lord of the Rings. I got Beanie Babies of a snake and an angel to go with Good Omens. This shelf is fantasy without any romantic subplots,
Which is unfairly hard to find.
I'm not typically the person who has more than one physical copy of the same book, but this is the hardback of The Amulet of Samarkand, and this is the paperback cover that I found signed in a charity shop. This shelf is mass market paperback. I actually got to meet Tamara Pierce, Garth Nix, and Annette Curtis Klaus at fantasy conventions and get these books signed. And I ordered a signed copy of The Adept. These are my Louis Sachar books. He was my favorite author when I was a child.
Holly Black is one of my favorite authors now.
Here's a globe and my figures from Yuri on Ice. I wish they would make an art book for that anime because I'd be all over it. And here's some other serious novels focused on fairies. This shelf is epic fantasy. We have a handmade dragon egg and resin dagger that I got from vendors at a Renaissance festival. I got the UK versions of Game of Thrones illustrated novels because the UK books use thinner pages than US and they are therefore less heavy. I actually got this hardcover Illumicrate set of Black Magicians by Trudy Canavan because they don't sell
Hardcover versions
anywhere else. And the hardbacks have bigger font and maps, so they're easier to read. Plus, they come signed with some nice illustrations and covers. I have another shelf for epic
fantasy. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, illustrated by Alan Lee, is such a heavy box set, it needs to be laid on its side to evenly distribute the weight throughout the shelf.
My bottom shelf has teen fantasy romance that mostly focuses on hetero relationships. I've got some really cute crocheted things like my Pokeball I got at an anime con, and this bookworm that my sister commissioned for me when I graduated school. This bookcase begins with mythology retellings and statues on top. There's a vase depicting Apollo and the Muses my grandparents got from Greece, and a little statue of Pan. Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller and Loki by Mackenzie Lee are some of my favorite retellings. Here's Egyptian statues of Thoth and the weighing of the feather of Ma'at against the human heart. The next shelf shows the Black Butler manga with a bust of Ciel, my favorite character. I haven't read from this volume onwards, which is why it's facing pages out instead of spine out. This small shelf has some queer books with pretty sprayed edges. The very detailed edges are part of a set from Illumicrate, F.T. Lucan's teen fantasy romance standalones. This is a candle that I made while I was at a Pride festival. These are my graphic novels with more lighthearted ones on the left and darker ones on the right. There's some figures from the Heartstopper comics one of my close friends got me. This shelf is mystery, thriller, horror, the Death Note manga, some classics like Edgar Allan Poe, Dorian Gray, Frankenstein, and Sherlock Holmes. These hardcover editions of horror classics with thick glossy pages and colored illustrations are a really great value from Barnes & Noble for only $10 each. The next shelf has my nonfiction. I don't reread nonfiction very often, which is why I haven't kept very many for reference. The ones that I did keep, I put in a rainbow array. I couldn't commit to that for the whole collection, but for one shelf, it's very nice. This is a hand-carved wooden book with pages that I can write in, showing the claddagh, because I am proud of my Irish heritage. The bottom shelf has very heavy art books and photo albums. Some of my favorite artists are Thomas Kinkade, Van Gogh, Yuhaguri, Claude Monet, Amy Brown.
Last, the small bookcase has my unread books, adult fiction on top, teen and children in the middle, and nonfiction on the bottom. Months passed, and then I decided to make some changes.
I've freed up some space on my wall of read books because I have decluttered those 40 books, and I want to utilize the space that I now have open by bringing my unread books in from the other room. In order to do that, I'm going to have to rearrange some of this organization. Remember how I added cardboard and tape to this shelf to go into this bookcase? Well, I actually decluttered enough books that this extra shelf is no longer needed, so I can remove this and go put it back into the shelving unit where it originally came from. Phew! We made it back to the present. I'm excited to show you the final layout where I have all of my books, both read and unread, in one place. I put the unread books within their respective genres, facing pages out instead of spine out, as a visual flag to myself that I need to read them. Exceptions include if they have really pretty sprayed edges on the pages I wanted to display, and my nonfiction reference shelf, because I need to have the spine facing outward regardless of whether I've read them or not in order to have that rainbow effect. The narrow bookcase still starts with poetry on top, but the rest of the bookcase is romance, which is exciting. There's contemporary queer romance, and then both straight and queer historical romance, 2 shelves of queer fantasy romance. I do have some new additions to my queer book collection, including this beautiful self-published Paladin Shadow by Tavia Lark, and 1 shelf of straight fantasy romance, where there's not even a queer side character. Here are some of the show bills and cast lists of plays and musical performances I have been fortunate enough to see. The cherry bookcase still showcases Arthurian retellings and magical schools, but it also has an area to showcase my favorite fantasy authors, Holly Black, Owen Colfer, and Rick Riordan. On the bottom, there's Ranger's Apprentice and Warrior Cats. This bookcase has some favorite fantasy standalones on top, a shelf of fantasy without romance, a shelf of fantasy paperbacks, a section for novels about fairies for different age groups. Then we've got a shelf and a half of epic
Fantasy.
a shelf of science fiction, and the bottom shelf is half realistic children's fiction and then half children's short fiction, including fairy tales. This bookcase hasn't changed a lot. We start with retellings of mythology on top. Then we've got 3 shelves of eerie, suspenseful type books, mystery, thriller, horror, a shelf of graphic novels, both lighthearted and darker tone, a rainbow of nonfiction reference book, and some art books and photo albums. Thank you so much for watching until the end. Like so the algorithm will recommend this video to more people. Comment below. Tell me how you organize your books. Subscribe so you don't miss the next bookish video from me. Happy reading!